I am Coach Jay, and it's a very beautiful fall day. It's going to start snowing here, I think, in a couple of days. But, anyways, I always like to start my class with a corny dad joke. So today's is this: I accidentally drank a bottle of invisible ink last night. I'm currently in the hospital waiting to be seen. Ba-dum-bum. If we can take 2 deep healing breaths in through the nose, out through the mouth. Again, into the nose, out through the mouth. You know, when we're all stressed and tense and stuff, like our chest kind of like squeezes near our heart because we start breathing up here. So it squeezes our heart, and then our breathing gets kind of heavy. So when we breathe lightly, sometimes our body talks to our brain and sometimes our brain talks to our body. It's afferent and efferent communication. So sometimes if we breathe nicely, we're telling our body, you know what, all is good in the hood. I'm relaxed. All right, today I'm going to be talking about trauma dumping and the impact that it has. Sometimes if you're traumatized, we have a tendency to trauma dump on others. Sometimes people have a tendency to trauma dump on us. And especially sometimes if we're going through something and we share our trauma with others, they have a tendency to, in return, dump their trauma on us. I think a lot of it is because they want to feel that they get us or they understand or can sympathize with us. But that in itself can be traumatizing. So trauma dumping happens when someone shares a story of trauma without considering its impact or to control another person. But usually they just don't understand its impact. Especially if you're in trauma mode, you're not really thinking too much of the other person or how they can handle what you're going to dump. You're just thinking, I need to get this off my chest, because a lot of times trauma and stress is like a soda bottle. You shake it, you shake it, shake it. You got to release that top or else it's going to explode. Most often, trauma dumping doesn't leave room for the listener to opt out of the conversation. I mean, let's face it, sometimes you go to friends, family, and you want to tell them something serious that you're going through. They're not going to say, hold on, I don't want to hear this right now. Or, let me take the cookies out of the oven. It's almost like a captive audience. And the same thing happens with us. How many times are we like on the phone or going somewhere and somebody starts telling us something serious? And we're like, okay, well, this is not a good time for me to say, I gotta go. I gotta find a good way to end this segment. While trauma dumping can bring a sense of relief or gratification to the sharer, those on the receiving end may very well feel drained or down or frustrated or angry or even taken advantage of. Every time I call a friend or a family member, whenever they pick up the phone, if I have something to say, I'll say, hey, listen, I do want to share something with you. Do you have about 10 minutes? So I'm giving, that way they can say, listen, honestly, I was about to walk out the door right before you called, giving them that out as opposed to me saying, oh my God, I got to tell you about this. And I start rambling, and then they're like, well, I was just about to walk out the door. And then you get, people offended and stuff. The line between trauma dumping, reaching out for support, and constructive vulnerability is often blurry. If you're a highly conscious or socially anxious person, or if you're worrying about being perceived as a toxic person, that might lead you to undershare your needs and to lack a connection with others. On the other hand, oversharing may be a trauma response or a sign that you're ready for or need support. Trauma dumping is not the same as educating others or raising awareness of the effects of trauma. It's not seeking support from loved ones necessarily. And it's not the same as sharing a space of intimacy or vulnerability. Trauma dumping is really you're just lifting up that trash can of trauma and letting it dump into somebody else, or if they're doing it to us. Learning how discussing trauma can impact others may help you do it in a way that aids your healing process while minimizing harm to others. Trauma dumping versus venting, and there is a difference. The concept of trauma dumping refers to oversharing. An example of trauma dumping may involve someone casually referring to an instance of childhood trauma in front of a coworker who is negatively impacted by that interaction. Negatively impacted, whether it's emotionally or even time-wise. They don't have the time to hear it right then and there. So venting is very different from dumping. While trauma dumping tends to involve the same stories, venting may look more like talking about a bad day once or twice and then letting it go. The purpose of venting is often just to blow off steam. Meanwhile, someone might use trauma dumping to get sympathy or preferential treatment from the listener. Because let's face it, we get a lot of false benefits if we stay in this victim mode. And I don't like to say it because it sounds cold and callous, but some people that don't do necessarily the hard work and they're still in victim mode 10 years after the event, there's a lot of false benefits, with that. So signs of trauma dumping, these are possible signs. They're not, a panacea or one size fits all. But sharing the same story repeatedly or sharing graphic details. Sometimes, people that trauma dump love to, and they're waiting for this person's, eyes to bulge, and they're just looking for this reaction. Constantly interjecting mentions of past traumas into casual conversations. And this again could be a trauma response. Sometimes people are talking socially or in a party, and they'll bring up their own childhood trauma. That is like oversharing, and that could be a trauma response. So just be mindful of that. Not knowing much about the people you share your story with. Some people you just meet and they're telling you all of their trauma. And I'm not talking about mental health professionals, I'm talking about casual people. Or sometimes if we have trauma ourselves, we'll just be talking to a random person and divulge all of our information to them. Intentionally choosing people who may feel more obligated to listen. That could be, manipulative and coercive. And posting detailed accounts of trauma on social media and to the general audience. For those of you that are on social media, you don't necessarily need to hear everybody's personal business. And a lot of times you don't want to hear it. If you live with complex trauma or post-traumatic stress disorder, which is PTSD, trauma dumping or oversharing could be a natural trauma response and coping mechanism, as I've just said. Trauma dumping is common on social media, but overexposure to stories of abuse or assault may lead to it could lead to others experiencing various trauma, emotional exhaustion, re-traumatization. I mean, we could even re-traumatize ourselves with the story that we tell. A lot of times, if our focus is not towards moving forward and healing, it could be very easy to keep telling our story and just re-traumatizing ourselves rather than, assigning purpose to our pain or meaning to our mess and really trying to move forward. According to a 2018 research, oversharing on social media may also cross boundaries by breaking down barriers between private and public. And in some cases, rare, but in some cases, this can actually open a door to a vulnerability for an affair. So you got to be careful with this. It also suggests social media trauma dumping could cause disconnection and undersharing in the long run when it becomes a substitute for deeper one-on-one interactions. And this is actually what I mean. A lot of times, instead of working things out with your partner, your spouse, your significant other, we trauma dump on social media. Somebody sends us a private message. Oh my God, what have you must have went through? Then we get back and next thing you know, a secret is occurring. And then that secret can, build onto an affair. So in addition, there was another study that shared covering social media's impact on teens, like oversharing. It oftentimes can cause depression, loneliness, low self-esteem. So nobody watching this currently is a teen, but just something to be mindful of. But if there's a teen that's reading this also, which you can't stop whomever from reading your stuff, but it's just more healthy from a private perspective, not to trauma dump on social media. Reading accounts of other people's self-harm and trauma could be also triggering for many out there that are suffering with other problems. So again, there's a difference between venting and seeking help rather than trauma dumping. Do you need to stop sharing your traumatic experiences? Not necessarily. Talking about your trauma is not a harmful behavior. In fact, it's necessary in a lot of ways, healthy and helpful. However, context is key when evaluating if sharing about a traumatic experience is conducive to healing and safe for everybody involved. Again, when you share something with somebody, it would be nice to ask yourself, okay, if I share this with a person, A, am I re-traumatizing myself? B, is it a good, safe place and space to be in? And C, how and do I care if this affects the listener? At first, it could help to reevaluate whether the behavior is truly serving you. As a first step in the process, you could ask yourself, how is my sharing impacting others? Why am I sharing my story? Is it because I have a relationship of mutual trust with this person, or because it feels good to me in the moment? Have I given the other person a chance to share their past, their thoughts, their possible traumas? Have I given the other person a chance to opt out of the conversation before I reel them in with a captive audience and telling them my, deepest secrets and woes? Does the person I'm talking to seem comfortable about the topic I'm about to share? A lot of times people, especially with CPTSD that have consistent, continuous, long-term trauma, they can talk about it like, what are you having for dinner? When somebody that hasn't experienced that, they're like almost offended. They're taken back, like, oh my God, like, why are you sharing that with me? But again, to the other person, it's like, yeah, it was my life for 20 years, it is what it is. If you decide it's time to reconfigure how you share about trauma, consider a few things. Consider cultivating mindfulness. What emotions or triggers prompt oversharing? Addressing feelings like sadness, anger, or confusion can help reduce the urge to trauma dump if the behavior is masking more unpleasant emotions. Also, communicating. You may feel like it's a perfect opportunity to open up, but asking is the best way to be on the same page. You can try something like, no pressure to say yes, but this reminds me of something personal and intense. Do you mind if I share? Clarify boundaries. Creating and enforcing clear boundaries is a great way to learn about protecting your own emotional health and respecting the boundaries of others. Also, trauma-informed therapy or coaching. Some forms of coaching or therapy can be re-traumatizing. Um, uh, so, you want to make sure that people that you're talking to do have a betrayal trauma credential in some capacity. There's actually a few couples that I talk to, not elsewhere, um, where they came to me because of what's called T trauma, therapy trauma. And one of them, they discovered their spouse had, I think, 50 affairs over the course of 10 years. And when they went to their therapist, the therapist says, well, if you break that down, it's only about 5 a year. And I understand what the therapist was doing. He was trying to like desensitize or get somebody to think about another perspective. But one affair in 10 years is devastating and overwhelming. So I think that the therapist was just, I don't know, not credentialed in trauma or something. All right. And obviously, well, talking with a coach or a counselor is different from sharing with a loved one that you've known for many years. While your best friend, who probably isn't, trained, of course, to provide trauma therapy or coaching, they can offer some emotional support. Again, if they are emotionally available, if they do have the emotional capacity. And you can do this by saying, I'd like to share something. Would it be okay? That said, you're also not obligated to listen to someone else's trauma, nor are you responsible for the emotions of their past or their experiences. This happens often when you share your trauma and others take this as an invitation to share theirs. And again, I think their intentions are good. They're like, oh, okay, you feel comfortable sharing with me. I'm going to share with you. And, plus I don't want you to feel as bad sharing with me. So I want to share some of my trauma. And, then you got two people re-traumatizing each other and themselves. The key is confirming mutual consent when talking about topics that might be difficult to handle or triggering for someone else. But reaching out for help and support is a healthy response and a part of emotionally secure relationships. Anyways, let me just quickly recap. Trauma dumping refers to persistently oversharing traumatic experiences with people who may not be ready or willing to receive the information. Trauma is a very sensitive topic. Like I said, one person could have went through, trauma for 20 years and they talk about it like, what they're having for dinner, when somebody else could like become traumatized just by hearing your story. So while some conversations do bring intimacy and possibly healing, it also, in some circumstances, could breed more trauma, either to you or the other person. It's not always clear when bringing up trauma if it's appropriate. Is it appropriate time, space, place, whatever. But increasing self-knowledge, approaching others with empathy, and practicing mindfulness in your communication can help demystifying this matter. So I wanted to share this information because I really encourage you to consider if you are re-traumatizing yourself every time you share your story. Yes, we must vent and get our story off our chest, there's no doubt. But we do have to ask ourselves, is sharing this story hindering or helping my healing?